Folks have been chasing gold in these mountains since before any of us drew breath. And the tale of the lost Dutchman's mine has a way of slipping into a man's mind and hanging on like a burr in a horse's tail. It's a story filled with hard men, old legends, half-truths, and more bones than treasure. Yet it still draws dreamers into the superstitions every year. Men and women who figure they're the one soul smart enough, tough enough, or just lucky enough to strike what generations have missed. To understand the Lost Dutchman story, you've got to picture the land first. The Superstition Mountains rise east of what's now Phoenix, a jagged upthrust of stone that looks like the earth decided to bare its teeth. Every ridge seems to fold back upon itself. Every canyon hides a dozen more. It's the kind of country where a man can step off a well-cut trail and be hopelessly turned around inside of 10 minutes. Rattlesnakes sun on the rocks. Cougars keep watch from the ledges. And in the summer, the heat hits like a blacksmith's hammer. It's one of the last places on God's green earth a man ought to go searching for death or gold. But plenty have done both. Now, the tale of the mine didn't begin with the so-called Dutchman, and that's the first truth folks ought to reckon with. It starts long before, back when the Apache held this land and roamed it free. The tribes knew those mountains like the backs of their hands. They hunted the canyons, slept in the shadows of the ridges, and carried their stories from campfire to campfire. Among those stories were whispers of a sacred place the spirits guarded. Some said evil dwelt there, something old and not fit for human eyes. The tribes didn't walk those lands unless necessity drove them, and even then they traveled as men walk among graves, quiet, watchful, and ready to leave at a moment's notice. Whether the Apaches actually mined gold is a matter men have debated for years. Some say they had no use for it, and that's mostly true. But a people can know where gold lies without carving it from the stone. A man can know where a rattler sleeps without poking it with a stick. The tribes held their secrets tight, and if they knew the whereabouts of a rich vein or a hidden cache, they weren't about to share it with any wandering white man intoxicated with greed. The next piece of this puzzle is the Peralta family, Mexican miners who came north long before Arizona carried that name. According to the stories, the Peraltas discovered a rich deposit of gold in the Superstitions in the early 1840s. They worked it in secret, packing mule trains with ore and hauling it back south. The gold was rich, too rich, some say, and word leaked out like water through cracked leather. Greed has a way of ruining even the best-kept plans. About the year 1848 or so, the Peralta family made their final journey into the mountains with a large mining party. They planned to strip out what they could and abandon the site, but the Apaches were watching. To them, these mountains weren't just rugged stone. They were sacred ground. To see them torn open for treasure was like watching a grave dug up for plunder. They hit the Peralta miners fast and without mercy, wiping out nearly every last man in what some folks have called the Peralta Massacre. The story goes that only a few escaped, and the rest were left where they fell, scattered like broken tools across the canyons. Years later, prospectors would claim to find worn saddles, broken tools, and small lumps of gold near old campsites. But claims outnumbered truths in these tales 100 to 1. What's sure is this: the Peraltas vanished from the Superstitions, and the mountains grew quiet again. This would have been the end of it, another lost treasure swallowed by time, except for one man. Jacob Waltz, the so-called Dutchman, though he was actually a German immigrant. Waltz drifted into America like many others in the 19th century, searching for opportunity. He mined in California, worked odd jobs, and eventually settled near Phoenix. Folks who knew him said he was tight-lipped, hard-working, and about as stubborn as the desert stones he walked upon. He wasn't the kind of man one took lightly, nor the type to get lost chasing fairy tales. The story claims that Waltz came into possession of a map, a clue, or a piece of information handed down from one of the surviving Peraltas. Some say it was given as a reward for saving a man's life. Others say he stole it. Others still say he courted a woman whose family knew the secret. The truth is clouded, as most truths become after men die and storytellers take over. Yet what matters is simple. Waltz went into the superstitions alone and came back with gold. Rich gold. The kind you don't find lying on the ground. Folks noticed. People always notice gold. Waltz didn't talk much about where he'd found it. He lived like a man carrying a burden he couldn't share. He made occasional trips into the mountains and always returned with just enough to keep him fed and housed, never enough to draw the wrong eyes. Some said he had a partner, a man named Jacob Waltz, who disappeared mysteriously. Waltz claimed Apaches had killed him. Others whispered that Waltz had done the deed himself to keep the secret. No one could prove a thing, and the desert holds its silence better than most men. The closest Waltz ever came to revealing his mind came when he fell gravely ill in 1891. He was taken in by a woman named Julia Thomas and her friends, who cared for him in his final days. It's said that on his deathbed he tried to describe the location of the mine. He spoke of landmarks, a pit like a funnel, the 3 red hills, a shadow shaped like a praying man. But the desert is full of such shapes, and a dying man's words can be as crooked as a dry creek bed. They tried to follow his directions after his passing, but the mountains swallowed them, just as they had swallowed countless others. Now, after Waltz died, the search began in earnest. Prospectors, cowboys, treasure hunters, and drifters of every shape ventured into the superstitions. Some claimed to find clues. Others stumbled across old tunnels that collapsed if you breathed too hard near them. A few came out with pockets heavy, but most came back battered, starved, or delirious with sunstroke. And more than a few never came back at all. One of the reasons this story keeps its grip is that a surprising number of bones have been found out there. Men who marched into those mountains with hope in their hearts and never saw another sunrise. Some say the Apaches hunted them, but by the late 1800s, the tribe was no longer waging war in the old manner. The truth is simpler and harder. The desert is a killer. Heat, cold, thirst, and rough footing are foes that ask no questions and give no mercy. In the early 20th century, as Phoenix grew and men with softer hands took interest in frontier lore, the Dutchman's mind became a kind of legend that fed itself. Writers expanded upon rumors. Newspapers printed tall tales. Map sellers made a living selling contradictions. Ranchers reported strangers wandering through their land, asking questions that had no good answers. A few determined seekers spent their entire lives in the superstitions, living off canned beans and mules' patience. One man, Adolph Ruth, an elderly treasure hunter from back east, came searching in 1931. He carried a map, another so-called Peralta map, and a conviction stronger than caution. They found his skull months later in the desert, with a bullet hole through it. No one ever proved whether it was murder or suicide, but his death only added fuel to the legend's fire. Men claim his last note said, "Veni, vidi, vici." Others say it mentioned gold beyond imagining. There are more versions of that note than there are reliable versions of the Bible. The truth is simple. Ruth died in the desert, and the desert kept its secret. Now, throughout the 20th century, the government began marking trails, erecting warnings, and trying to dissuade amateurs from wandering off into the hidden gorges. Some listened, many didn't. The legend still holds power, and men remain men. If you tell a fellow not to do something, odds are he'll try it twice just to prove he can. Archaeologists, geologists, and historians have studied the superstitions and found little evidence of any large mining operation. But no shit, of course, one man ain't a large operation. Some point to the region's natural gold scarcity and say the entire tale is no more than smoke with no fire behind it. Others argue that the mine was real, but small, hidden, or destroyed by time and weather. A few believe the Peralta's mined not a vein, but a rich placer deposit, now depleted or washed away. And there are old-timers who insist the truth lies deeper still, that the mountain shelters caverns and tunnels from a time before written history. Not many scholars agree with that, but scholars rarely agree with those who make their living off the land. And the superstitions aren't the kind of place a book can explain. The Superstition Wilderness became federally protected land in the latter half of the 20th century, which means no legal mining can be done there now. Anytime there could be treasure, it seems that there is a government regulation. But that hasn't slowed treasure hunters much. Men still search, though now with backpacks instead of horse packs, GPS devices instead of stars, and metal detectors instead of raw instinct. Yet for all their gadgets, they have no more success than the men who came before them with nothing but a canteen and a stubborn streak. What keeps the legend alive isn't just the gold, it's the silence. The fact that the story has no ending. The mine, if it existed, has never been found. No official record has ever confirmed its location. No prospector has returned with the motherlode. It remains unfinished business, a tale half told, a wound left open. And men aren't comfortable with unanswered questions. They poke at mysteries like a dog digs up bones. It's in our nature. But there's more to the story if a man looks deeper, and it isn't written on any map or carved into any canyon wall. It's the reason stories like the lost Dutchman's mine refuse to die. This tale represents every dream a man has ever chased into the unknown. It speaks to the stubborn part of the human soul that believes there's something out there waiting just for him, if only he can find it. Some search for gold, some for understanding, some for redemption, but all search for something. Waltz's secret, real or imagined, became a mirror held up to generations. Each man who walks into the superstitions looking for the mine is really looking for something inside himself. A test, a challenge, a reckoning. Men are still drawn there, boots crunching in the dust, sun on their backs, maps in their pockets, conviction in their hearts. Some find nothing. Some find themselves. A few find trouble. And the mountains stand unchanged, watching, keeping their counsel. In the end, what can be said with certainty about the lost Dutchman's gold mine? It's a story stitched together from truth, legend, and wishful thinking. It's a patchwork of Apache warning, Mexican tragedy, frontier grit, and the desperate hope of men who wanted more out of life than what the world gave them. It's a tale with enough truth to keep a man wondering and enough mystery to keep him walking. The mine may have been real. It may have been a pocket of gold so small it was exhausted in a few months. It may have been a hoax Waltz used to keep himself fed. Or it may have been something only he and the mountains ever knew. But whatever the truth, the legend has grown larger than any single man's shovel. And sometimes, a legend is worth more than gold, because gold can be spent. Legends endure. Even now, as the sun sets over the superstitions and the shadows stretch long across the desert, there's a feeling in the air, a stillness that hints at secrets buried deep. The wind whispers along the stone and through the brittle grass, as if carrying voices from a time long gone. Men camp in the foothills and stare up at those ridges, wondering if the next man to find the mine will be them, or if the mountains have already chosen to keep their treasure forever. If the lost Dutchman's mine exists, it lies hidden where only a handful of men have walked and fewer still survived. And if it doesn't exist, well, that hasn't stopped it from shaping the lives of thousands who believed it did. The desert doesn't care whether a tale is true or not. It measures men the same either way. And the Dutchman's legend, like the mountains themselves, stands as a challenge handed down through generations, whispering to any man bold enough to listen, "Come and see if you're worthy." Whether a man finds gold or death is between him and the desert. And the desert never answers questions, it only reveals truths.